Good morning to everyone. I'd like to reconvene the 42nd meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure. And first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone present, as well as the viewing and listening audience, to this, the committee's first public hearing pursuant to an inquiry into effectiveness of measures in place to reduce traffic congestion on the nation's roads. Just a couple of announcements before we get into the hearing. I would like to remind all members and all officials present here, either we turn off our cell phones or we place the cell phones on silent or vibrate. To indicate to everyone that this hearing is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. I'd like to inform members of the viewing and listening audience that you all can send comments via email at parl101, PARL101 at ttparliament.org, on our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament, or on Twitter at ttparliament. I'd like to welcome officials of the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, and the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering. And at this time, I would like to invite everyone to please, if you can introduce yourselves. We can probably start with Dr. Townsend.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Trevor Townsend. Good morning. I'm Dr. Trevor Townsend. I am the head of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering of UE and a senior lecturer in transportation and traffic engineering.
Hello, I'm Dr. Philbert Morris. I'm here as part-time lecturer helping with civil and environmental engineering transportation studies.
Good morning. I am Lacey Williams, part-time lecturer, Department of Civil Engineering in the specific field of transportation and traffic engineering.
Good morning. I am Mrs. Tara Ram Logan, the Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Raymond Sipol, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Good morning. I'm Sonia Francis Yearwood, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Good morning. I am Navin Ramsing, Acting Director of Highways.
Good morning. I'm Hayden Phillip, Program Director, PR, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Steve Garib Singh, Head Engineering Department, NITCO.
Hi, good morning. I am Mahadev Jagdev, Acting Chief Technical Officer, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bashir Mohammed, General Manager, PTSC.
Hi, good morning. Adandi Pigot, Traffic Engineer, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Pleasant morning. Randolph Protein, Chief Traffic Warden, Ministry of Works and Transport.
Good morning. Ulrich Lacroix, Police Municipal Police Inspector.
Good morning. Baliram Lala, Municipal Police, Shogunat Borough Corporation.
Thank you very much. I'm Deerup Timal, Chairman of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure.
Hi, good morning. Rushton Parry, Vice Chairman, Member.
Hi, good morning. Nigel De Freitas, Member.
Okay, I'd also like to inform that Senator Widmark, who is also a member of the committee, will be joining us at a later time during this inquiry. Just the inquiry objectives, I would like to just inform all present that the objectives of this inquiry are to examine the traffic patterns in Trinidad and Tobago and the respective major contributors to congestion, 2, to be appraised of the measures in place to reduce traffic congestion and to determine whether these measures are effective. 3, to determine the economic and social costs of traffic congestion. And 4, to determine the challenges associated with reducing traffic congestion. At this point, I would like to invite, well, before I do, just a few words about the structure of this hearing. We have approximately 2 hours. We intend to finish at 12:15 because due to other time commitments this afternoon. And we have 3 separate parties here. And so in an attempt to have a structured format to the hearing, we will be allocating approximately 35 to 40 minutes to each party for presentation and questions from members and responses. First, we would go with the University of the West Indies, Dr. Townsend and his team. Then the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. And we'll leave the Ministry of Works and Transport for the last. Now, each one we are looking at, as I said, roughly 35 to 40 minutes. And there is likelihood, of course, that we would not be able to cover with each party probably all of the issues that we would like to raise. What that would mean is that we may need to call you back at a subsequent date based on what transpires at this hearing for a further session. But we felt that we should give everyone the opportunity today to participate, and seeing that all 3 parties, there is interconnection in terms of this particular topic that we are looking at. We felt that to have everyone present so that we can hear what is being discussed and that the interaction amongst the different parties in terms of the information that is coming out could also help this inquiry. So first, I'd like to invite Dr. Townsend for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the opportunity to address this inquiry into some of the issues that we see impacting the measures to reduce traffic congestion on the nation's roads. Just by way of further introduction of myself and a bit of my history, I am a traffic and transport engineer by profession. Graduated from University of West Indies with a bachelor's in engineering, master's from University of Manitoba, and a doctorate from Northwestern University. I've also functioned in the capacity of chief traffic engineer of the then Ministry of Public Utilities and National Transportation. I was in traffic management from 1978 to 1988. And then I went to PTSC as a general manager, and I spent 10 years in PTSC. And then I went into the private sector, and more recently, over the last 4 years or so, went into the University of the West Indies. So that I've had both practical experience as well as dealing with the academics in terms of the traffic and transportation system in Trinidad and Tobago. When I was in traffic management, I was one of the people responsible for the inauguration of what they call now the world's largest roundabout, the Queen's Park Savannah Reticulation Scheme, which we did in 1980. And when I was in PTSC, I was responsible for the start of the express commuter service as well as the school maxi taxi service. And our whole intentions of those and other initiatives were to create a self-sufficient public transport entity as is prescribed in the Act. In terms of the issue under consideration today, my purpose is just to identify the key issues involved in which affect the operation and development of the transportation system, and highlight some of the policy items which need to be addressed going forward in order to improve the functioning of the transportation system to reduce congestion and to enhance mobility. So I just want to start with the concept of what is congestion. There's ample evidence that the road transport system is currently in crisis. During peak periods, both highways and urban arterials are congested, car ownership levels are high, car occupancy levels are low. Our public transportation systems are undermanaged, disorganized, and not user-friendly. Parking in major urban areas is inadequate and uncontrolled, and pedestrians and persons with disabilities are frequently left to fend for themselves. So there's no question, I think that's why you're here. There's nothing earth-shattering about what I told everyone. No one looks surprised. So that in times of crisis, the first response should be a plan. And plans should be based on data and analysis and should be informed by an established policy framework, because a plan is different than a policy. So congestion occurs basically, and the technical definition is when you have a facility and the rate of arrival at that facility exceeds the rate at which people can be served. So normally it's a signal that there's somebody called disequilibrium between demand and supply. Now the transportation system is such that you can't really, there's no market to buy yourself out of congestion. In a situation in the private sector, prices would change and those who are willing to pay would pay, those who can't pay would drop off. But in congestion, we all pay by wasted time. And therefore, there's a loss to the society, what they call the loss of consumer surplus. Now, we can look at it in three different ways or three different levels. There's short-term congestion, which could occur for a number of reasons. Example, an accident that blocks a lane of highway. And one accident that may take 15 minutes to move or 10 minutes to move the vehicles could cause an hour and a half of congestion additional. And that is because of the nature of traffic flow. There's medium-term congestion, and which is what we experience on our daily commute in terms of our heavily trafficked routes. And then there are long-term imbalances that cause congestion. And we do have a lot of long-term imbalances because of our land use and how our activity patterns are dispersed. Now, the classification is more one of degree rather than kind, but it is useful because the boundaries are blurred. But it is a useful context to examine the causes of and the possible solutions to traffic congestion that we experience. So let me start with short-term congestion. In most modern countries, we utilize comprehensive transportation systems management, sometimes called traffic management, to manage the flow of traffic so that more efficient movement can be achieved on the road network and to ensure protection of vulnerable persons and areas from the negative effects of unsafe operations, congestion, and overcrowding. Now, these short-term actions are aimed at establishing a priority of usage of existing facilities that is consistent with the overall transport policy. The traffic engineer needs to intervene using appropriate traffic control devices, traffic regulations, enforcement, and low-cost engineering solutions. And those decisions should be based on timely data collection and engineering analysis. Traffic management is not simply a highway engineering function, but it must consider land use, priority to public transport arrangements, and priority to pedestrians and non-motorized vehicles, parking control, and environmental protection. It encompasses the whole gamut. And the analysis, in our opinion, the analysis and implementation of proper short-term measures requires an improved traffic management capability and authority. We view the current institutional arrangement, where it seems as if traffic management is somewhat subsumed under the Highways Division, doesn't support that required function. And although we see that the police do have a key enforcement role, the proper design of traffic management measures requires engineering expertise to begin with. So even how police enforce should be so informed. The sad thing is, though, that for years there has been no systematic collection of traffic data in terms of the fundamental traffic characteristics, road accidents, and accident black spot analysis. And in the absence of such data, traffic management plans which have been implemented appear to be somewhat ad hoc and based on a hit-and-miss approach. A recent example of this was the debacle in Sangre Grande, where a traffic management plan had to be scrapped after a disaster's first 2 days of operation. Proper traffic engineering using good data and traffic simulation software for predictive analysis would have prevented such problems. We should no longer be in a position where we have to guess what would happen. We should be able to have done the data collection analysis, done the predictive simulation, and predict what we expect to happen. Of course, you can't predict 100%, and you may have surprises, but it's not a matter of just guessing and hitting and missing. So that our concern is that the traffic management function is really degraded, and it really has to be upgraded. So we have traffic signals which are not operating optimally, and that causes unnecessary delays. They also encourage flouting of the law. We have signage and road markings which are not up to standard, and we have a very expensive, I call it a multi-million-dollar National Traffic Management Center, which is underutilized and, in our opinion, ineffective. And the irony of it is that the cost of operating a proper traffic management system is really a very small fraction of what it costs to maintain our highway and secondary road system on an annual basis. We're really not talking about significant sums of money, but it must be allocated. So we recommend the establishment of a traffic and transportation planning division headed by a director and reporting directly to the permanent secretary of the ministry. And once that division is properly established, it can be mandated to reestablish a proper functioning traffic management system and develop and implement a priority listing of short-term projects. The division should also collect and analyze data and engage in medium and long-term transportation planning regarding the entire transport sector. And that has to interface with land use planning at the same time. So that's short-term. When we look at medium-term, the first thing we recognize is that we need a mass transit system. Trinidad has a relatively well-developed highway and main road system, but we have a very high per capita vehicle ownership of about 500 vehicles for every 1,000 people. We cannot build highways fast enough to solve our traffic congestion problems. But if mobility of people is the focus, then what is required are policies which encourage high occupancy vehicles usage and the development of a mass transit system. But we are not completely in the dark in terms of how to proceed. Because in March of 2016, the government engaged consultants through the IADB, and they conducted a high-level strategic analysis of the potential mass transit alternatives to implement in Trinidad, looking at the major east-west and north-south corridors. And that study had a number of objectives, but really to confirm the nature of the problem and the suitability of a mass transit solution, to analyze different options, to review the institutional arrangements for transport and urban mobility, and identify and propose complementary actions, things which should be done in conjunction with the mass transit system. Now, the consultants looked at several different technologies for delivering the required mass transit, and basically concluded that a bus rapid transit combined with priority bus route is the best bus-based mass transit alternative. In fact, that BRT, what they call the BRT PBR suggestion, was superior to, they also looked at a train-based or rail-based system. A tram train was the best one, but the BRT PBR was superior to that tram train on 10 of the 12 key criteria, in particular in terms of cost, potential ridership, accessibility, flexibility, modularity, non-exclusivity, and the net present value, which is the social benefit of doing that. Now, in January 2017, my colleagues and myself, who are members also of the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago Transportation Committee, had an opportunity to review the consultants' recommendations. And we, in fact, recommended immediate implementation of a BRT PBR project, starting with the East-West corridor. I attached a copy of our report for the reading of the committee. Essentially, that report was submitted to both the Ministry of Planning and Development as well as the Ministry of Works and Transport. We further on went to do a conceptual design of a mass transit system for the East-West Corridor. And that was also submitted to both the Ministry of Planning and Development and the Ministry of Works and Transport. And that is also attached as an appendix. So we are now in 2019. And as far as we are aware, and we stand to be corrected, no significant work has been done to implement these recommendations for the establishment of an effective mass transit system. The other complementary initiatives that the IDB consultants recommended are both short and medium term. And they include issues such as dedicated public transport lanes, great separation of critical crossings on the priority bus route. In fact, they recommend making the priority bus route a priority bus route, which means reduction of vehicles on the priority bus route. We recently did a survey on campus in terms of usage of the priority bus route. We found that at peak periods, 50% of the vehicles are light private cars on the priority bus route. When I was in PTSC, we did a study in terms of the impact of private cars on the priority bus route. And I think that we were able to show, probably the GM will have more up-to-date figures, that by just removing the private cars on the bus route, because it allowed for a faster turnaround of buses, PTSC could uplift an additional 30% of people using the same equipment on the priority bus route. Just an example of how how we treat the priority bus route is completely counter to how it should be treated. Another example, and I'll digress a bit. We just had major planning for the carnival. And I was disappointed to hear that there was a decision made, and it was announced by the police, I assume it was made by the police. I didn't hear about any input from traffic management or any input from PTSC, that the priority bus route would be open to private vehicles during carnival time. Now, this is when we should have been saying, leave your cars at home and take the bus, and that there'll be a heightened public transport service on the priority bus route. I mean, it's just the same as when we have a situation where we have a flood situation, or you want to evacuate Port of Spain, and we open the bus route to vehicles. That is to cause everybody to die if there's actually a flood. There's no way that you can move private vehicles through people in private vehicles, where we have found that the average occupancy is 1.3 persons per vehicle. I mean, cars don't die if there's a flood. The car could die, you could always get a new one. But people could die. If you want to move people in a hurry out of a city, then you commandeer your routes and bring in your high occupancy vehicles and you move them out. Not the other way around. You don't commandeer your high occupancy vehicle route and make it into a private car highway. That is just our opinion. So that we basically agree with the IDB in terms of the initiatives that they recommend: parking control, use of high occupancy vehicle lanes, promoting non-motorized mobility, all the standard, well-known, internationally accepted transportation system demand measures. And we said, let's go, let's do them. So we endorse those recommendations. I want to come back to the need for institutional strengthening. If I were to ask you, if you want to find out something in terms of public transport in Trinidad and Tobago, to whom do you go? Well, after you go to the minister and the permanent secretary, you can't go to anybody else, because there's no agency with the responsibility for the overall planning, management, and regulation and coordination of the public transportation sector outside of the ministry. But the ministry cannot run on a day-to-day basis that function. There needs to be an institution. And since before 1996, we have been calling for the establishment of a transit authority responsible for both private and publicly supplied mass transit or public transport services. Because we cannot ignore, although we appear to ignore, the fact that the bulk of our public transportation is delivered by privately owned and operated maxi taxis and taxis. They currently service at least 4 to 5 times what PTSC services. But they are essentially not subsidized. And their users are hardly taken care of. With the absence of really city gate, what other facilities are there for maxi-taxi passengers? Far worse for taxi passengers. We currently have, the IDB reported about 13,000 taxis. Well, that surprised me because 10 years before, there were 25,000. Where have they gone? Well, they have not seen it beneficial to remain as taxis. Because whereas if you were driving a taxi on the St. Anne's Cascade route, you have a big sign saying no entry to taxis, you cannot get beyond your stand at Hart Street. If you were driving a PH St. Anne's taxi, you penetrate all the way down to Salvatore Building. And you apply for hire boldly in front of the traffic police and the traffic wardens. And no one stops you, and they say, well, people want to earn eat a food, as they say. But they are taking food from the mouths of bona fide, regular taxi drivers who have a responsibility, first of all, to get a taxi badge. But they have to have the police certificate of good character, the age, etc., who have to get their vehicle inspected on an annual basis because it's a public service vehicle and all the other things. We cannot allow the PH trade to destroy the private sector authorized public transport. In fact, right now we have PH maxi taxis operating in Maraval. White vans, I've seen some of them creeping into Diego Martin too, basically running PH. I will leave that for another, because they say we have a limited time, and I can speak forever about this problem, right? So, but this, by the way, as I said, the Transit Authority proposal is not new. In fact, it is a policy of the government. In the Vision 2030 document, it is there. It is also in the Vision 2020 document. It is also in the 1996 document, National Internal Transport Policy document, which was done in the Ministry of Works at that time. And I'm pretty sure it was in a document that was done in 1986, I believe, when I was, or 87, when I was just Chief Traffic Engineer, coming out of the Traffic Management Branch. We had a multidisciplinary team from Town and Country Planning, from Highways Division, from the police, and that was recommended, and PTSC as well. So that we say we know what we want, but I am not seeing any moves to get that authority. So therefore, anybody who wants to come to Trinidad and wants to say, how do I get around with public transport? How can I coordinate? Yes, the buses can't go everywhere. How do I get a vehicle after I leave the bus stop? How do I get home? How do I get that last mile? No one can answer them. They're on their own. So we should not wonder that we recently did a survey and found that in Trin-City area, over 85% of households have 2 or more cars. And especially with foreign use cars, actually, I guess in real terms, the economists would tell me that it's lowering the cost of car ownership. Well, we see what the situation is. So in the medium term, we need 2 quick things. We need to start development of a mass transit system, and we need to deal with the institutional arrangements to manage the public transport sector. Let me deal with the long term, and then I will close. Travel is a derived demand, and it's based on the desire to participate in activities that are spatially separated. Now, the daily commute to work and to school is the most high-valued travel, and that's why it is so regular, and that is why it is so pervasive. So therefore, if we are going to look at the demand for travel in the long term, we have to look at where our activities are located in terms of our homes, our schools, and our businesses. We also have to treat with issues of mobility and access. Now, the UN Commission for Sustainable Development looked at the elements required for sustainable transport, and we want to create sustainable societies. Sustainable transport development is based on 6 pillars, and I would hope that the ministry, when I know is doing some national transportation plan, would consider these pillars. But no doubt they will speak to that when they speak. The first is integrated land use transportation planning. The second is developing a safe and clean and efficient and affordable public transportation system. The third is ensuring access to affordable rural transportation services. The fourth is addressing the mobility needs of special groups, example, those who are elderly and those who are persons with disabilities. And in the context of persons with disabilities, there is a strong push that we use universal design as opposed to exclusionary services. By universal design, the motto is if you design universally, if it is in a way designed so it can be used by a person with a disability, then it could be used by anybody. And that includes those persons with disabilities within the society, within the mainstream, as opposed to the model that excludes them and does something special for them. And the last is facilitate walking and non-motorized transport in urban centers. And I will leave you to judge whether or not our urban centers are conducive to walking and non-motorized transport. Sorry, that's the second to last. The fifth is reduce air pollution and carbon emissions. And I know that there have been a number of initiatives in that regard. I have one question which I've asked, and I know it's a point of some discussion, on whether or not we are 20 years too late for CNG in terms of an alternate fuel, especially since we see mainstream manufacturers are now bringing hybrids and electric vehicles into stream. There's an electric bus that can give you a 400-kilometer range. They're now designing electric vehicles that can charge with a charger on the garage roof or on the roof of the vehicle. So those issues we have to look at that going forward, because we're not looking for now, we're looking for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Because we see the effects of poor or non-existent land use transportation planning on a daily basis in terms of unnecessary travel, congestion, unregulated development, unregulated paratransit, wasteful subsidies that encourage inefficiency. And here I want to speak to one of my pet peeves. And I may get some people upset. But we know that we subsidize public transport usage at the PTSC. The PCSC GM, he could give me some more details. Our estimate is that the subsidy is actually in the vicinity of between $35 and $40 per passenger. $35 to $40 per passenger on average. Compare that with the average maxi taxi fare, which is about $10 per passenger if I average over all the systems. And they are not subsidized. But they are not the most highly subsidized public transport users in the country. We have a special group of public transport users who are subsidized to the tune of, in our estimate, $100 per passengers. They are known as the water taxi passengers. I get a lot of people upset because a lot of public servants who are my colleagues and friends use the water taxi on a regular basis. They love the service. And I agree, it's a great service, but I think they should pay for it. And not get the highest subsidy per passenger than Granny who lives in Miaro gets. So we give them a higher subsidy per passenger, and we give her a low subsidy per passenger, and she has to wait for the bus that may or may not come. You see, in conclusion, we can solve the transportation crisis by developing and implementing proper policies aimed at ensuring proper service levels for urban and rural dwellers without a debilitating drain on the state coffers. We need to support these policies by strategic institutions with clear mandates, authority, and accountability. Our population is under 1.5 million people. That is not high. We have the necessary resources and knowledge, and what we need is a will to take decisive action to change the current course of laissez-faire or uninformed policy making and replace it by scientific, data-driven approaches aimed at attaining measurable objectives. We must always be careful, and the reason why I asked to speak is because the questionnaire on congestion, as well-meaning as it was, it spoke to me of the autocentric view that so much of us have of the transport system. And we have to be careful that the focus on congestion reduction for private car users ignores the plight of public transportation users who, in our opinion, are currently not being properly served. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Townsend. What we do, again, because we're working within a certain time frame, I'll just change the format a bit. I'll ask the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government for some brief opening remarks. And after her, we'll go to the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Works and Transport, and then we'll have our questions and discussion afterwards. So, Mrs. Ramlogan.
Good morning, Chair, esteemed members of the committee, and the viewing public. It is our distinct pleasure to participate in these proceedings into the effectiveness of measures in place to reduce traffic congestion in the nation's road. It is expected that through our deliberations here today, we can determine the effectiveness of the existing legislative, regulatory, and administrative framework which governs the same. It is also anticipated that through our collaborative efforts, we can identify the existing challenges, deficiencies, and constraints which can inform the recommendations required to improve the governance structure, systems, policies, and procedures with respect to the reduction of traffic congestion on the nation's roads. And so today we are here based on our submission to you, the committee, to answer any questions and of course provide additional information as required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ramalogan. Mrs. Francis Hayward, PS in the Ministry of Works and Transport.
Good morning, Chair, members. Thank you for inviting the Ministry of Works and Transport to participate in this inquiry into the effectiveness of measures in place to reduce traffic congestion on the nation's roadways. The Ministry's remit includes the responsibility to provide public infrastructure and transportation for the social and economic development of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Given that remit, some of the services that we provide to bring this about include traffic management, construction and maintenance of highways and major and secondary roads, registration, classification, licensing and inspection of vehicles, enforcement of laws under the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act. The Ministry undertakes these activities in keeping with government's National Development Strategy, Vision 2030. In keeping with the subject of inquiry, we acknowledge that the Ministry is a key stakeholder for traffic management on the nation's roadways. This includes the highways, the main roads, and the secondary roads. In fulfilling this mandate, we liaise with the regional and city corporations, as well as consult with other key stakeholder groups, such as the university, to obtain valuable feedback. To understand traffic congestion, it is necessary to appreciate that roadways are designed to provide a certain capacity. When the volume of vehicle generates a demand for space that is greater than the design capacity of the roadway, immobility occurs. The congestion we face on a daily basis is a subjective experience for each road user and therefore can also be defined in relative terms of the difference between users' expectations of the network and its actual performance. The cause of the immobility we experience can be broken down as the travel demand surpassing the available capacity of the roadways throughout the island. Roadways can be categorized in different measures, and we have those that are designed and those that have evolved. The Ministry is cognizant of the impacts that traffic congestion causes to the citizenry. Key impacts include stress and frustrated motorists, which can lead to road rage, economic loss, which is the opportunity cost of wasted time, and increased air pollution from vehicle emissions. The Ministry sees as part of its mandate to provide relief to the commuting public, and to this end, we have adopted a multifaceted approach in treating with traffic congestion. In the main, this consists of hard solutions, such as providing additional capacity, as well as soft solutions through use of traffic management initiatives. Solutions can also be categorized, much as has been categorized by Dr. Townsend, in terms of short-term, medium-term, and long-term measures. These solutions are being implemented throughout and are deemed to have considerable shelf lives and will bring, we hope, relief to the citizen. In implementing these measures, we continue to seek to consult with our stakeholders to identify priority issues. We have sought to answer the questions submitted by the Joint Select Committee, and we stand ready to answer questions coming out of the responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam PS. At this time, the floor will be open to members of the committee to pose questions to the officials present. But before Mr. De Freitas starts off, I'd just like to introduce to all officials here Senator Wade Mark, who is a member of this committee. Mr. De Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning again, everyone. So we've had pretty interesting opening remarks and statements coming from the panelists, all of which is very good. Traffic congestion in Trinidad and Tobago has been a very pervasive issue for as long as most of us have been alive. I want to believe that the easiest thing to do or say when talking about traffic is to add more roads or to expand more roads or to talk about infrastructure. What I've not heard ever from PTSC, who's been in front of us before, or for the morning thus far, is the mentality of convenience that we have in Trinidad and Tobago in relation to the use of our vehicles. Let me just explain what I mean by that. So we did a survey, the committee, and we had 5,159 people responding to that survey in relation to traffic in Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the questions that was asked is, how do you travel to and from work daily? This is the response. Private vehicles, 89%. Carpool, between 0 and 10%. Maxi taxis, between 0 and 10. Taxis, between 0 and 10. Bus, less than 5%. Water taxi, less than 5%. We then turn around to ask them, how long do they spend in traffic? 2 to 3 hours. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the citizenry of this country knows that when they jump into their vehicle to go to work in the morning, they're going to experience 2 to 3 hours of traffic. And they still choose to jump in their vehicles and go to work. So you can add more buses, you can add more roads, you can add more infrastructure. They're not going to use it. They're not going to use it not because it's not convenient to do so. They're going to use it because to them, they want to drive their vehicle. They want to come and go as they please. I've seen the buses we use in this country. They're very good. Those buses that we use are interstate buses that are used in much bigger countries to go between states. The ones that those countries use within the city are the ones where you stand up on the hard seats. We don't use those here. We use the nice cushy seats and everybody's lined off 2 per row in the bus to go from San Fernando to Port of Spain. So it's very comfortable in terms of our PTSC buses, and we keep adding buses. But people still choose to use their private vehicles and rather be in the traffic. So my question to you is, how are you going to treat with that mentality, which tells you, I rather drive than take anything you can build?
I was waiting for the PTSC or the ministry to answer. I look at the questionnaire myself and I saw it. Because the questionnaire was limited naturally, it didn't ask the questions of the public transport users in terms of what has been their experience using the public transportation system. Because if it did, it would find out a couple of things. One of which is that the issue of the last mile and first mile is very important for many people. So whilst you may get a good ride on a very comfortable intercity PTSC bus from Port of Spain to Shogunas, it drops you off at the off-ramp. And you find your way from there. And if you are living in Felicity or Londonville, and you happen to be coming home after 9 in the night, you are at the mercy of the random PH driver to actually get to home. And therefore, if you are making a decision about should I use bus and then PH to get home, or bus and then find a way to get home, or should I buy a car, the decision is to buy a car. And what we have found is that once people buy a car, they are, as you yourself, your survey showed it, highly likely to use that car for their daily commute. Part of the reason being is that for many of them, the cost of operating that car, the full cost of operating that car, they do not see. Yes, they pay a cost in congestion, but most of them do not pay a cost for parking, for instance. So therefore, they don't perceive that cost. And therefore, people make decisions in terms of their lifestyle choices and their travel patterns reflected. If we are to change what would appear to be that mentality of convenience, but it really is a consumer responding to the services that he is given, then we have to design a transportation system which is much closer to what they need in their entire transportation journey than what we are currently designing. And that's the issue I want to make, that PTSC cannot be the designer of that system. And who else do we have? The operations of the maxi taxis and the taxis. Their interest is to operate their vehicles in the best places at the best times. So therefore, the change we're looking for, and in fact the IDB did in fact indicate that they didn't expect much migration from auto to mass transit. But to get that migration, you really have to understand that mobility as a service has to be managed. And the needs of the public, your and my needs, do not begin and end at Citygate or at the bus terminal. And therefore, our decisions are going to be driven by that.
Mr. Chair, thanks again. Now, I understand what you were saying in relation to the economics and I guess the perception that it costs less using your own vehicle than trying to use other modes of public transport. But the survey that we did shows a much greater cost that those who choose to use their own vehicles are painfully aware of. And the question that we asked was, how does traffic congestion affect you? 90% mentally. Economically was 75%, and emotionally, was about 65%. So there's an emotional, mental, and economic cost that citizens are experiencing when they're in traffic coming to work. Now you can expand that to basically put it in a scenario such as this. So you spend 3 hours in traffic in the morning, you get to work, you're mentally drained. You cannot be productive. There's no way. If you want to throw health into that, you're not even going to get a chance to eat breakfast because you probably have to leave home 4 a.m., 5 a.m. just to get to work on time. And then when you've dealt with the stresses of work for the day, you're facing 3 hours of traffic to go home. Well, you're not going to be able to be of any help in terms of family time or anything like that. So people understand the cost, but they're still preferring to use their own vehicles. So I'm wondering, because it seems as though transportation in Trinidad and Tobago is something that is predominantly government provided. Is it that we need to change the laws to allow for more private sector involvement, much like what you see in cities like New York? So for example, you spoke about PH taxis and the regulated taxis, which is the H taxis. how is it that after all of these years we have not moved to a system that you see a way where you have color-coded vehicles, you have major companies that are responsible for taxis, you have payment by distance driven as opposed to fixed cost payment? How come we haven't developed to that level as yet? But we're talking about PH taxis causing problems for regulated taxis. So is it that we need to change the laws to allow for more private sector involvement, to allow the companies such as Uber to be able to come in and provide a better service so that the worker can say to themselves, well, I know I can get from point A, which is my house, to point B, which is the office, without using my vehicle, and I can save that gas, and I can save that money, and I can save the wear and tear in my vehicle. Is that something that we need to look at? Ministry?
Member, I just want to go back a second to the response that was given on the previous question. In terms of your question regarding I think your statement was a situation of entitlement. Your original question dealt with people's perception as to why they use their own vehicle, and if it is a question of entitlement, and then we heard the response in terms of it not necessarily being entitlement, but it being a situation of need almost, if I understand clearly the response that came out. I want to start by saying that in a number of these situations and questions, there's a spectrum in terms of the answer. So you will have those individuals who, because of the system, they find that it is either a safety issue that they require their own vehicle in terms of getting from one place to another, in terms of how their daily commute may be. But you do have on the other spectrum, there are those individuals who they utilize their private vehicle because it is more convenient. We do have in place the public transportation and the attempts to put feeder systems in place through the PTSE for certain routes. It is not necessarily as widespread as it may be. In terms of whether or not the majority of transportation is provided by the state, public transportation, I'm not sure if the figure bears that statement to be correct. I think the last studies indicate that a higher level of individuals are transported by non-public transportation means, public meaning provided by the state. In terms of the need for legislative change to allow for private companies to come in for the provision of transportation, I'm not sure that there's a need for necessarily direct legislative change, because I think within the legislation that we have, there is the capacity for that to happen along certain regulations. Even the issue you called Uber, but I know we do have some local rideshare companies or initiatives that have come up. As to their levels of legality, that may be another question. I want to support the statement made by Dr. Townsend in terms of the need for institutional reform in certain areas to allow for a more planned manner of controlling public transportation. This is a conversation that we have had in the ministry with the university representatives, and it is something that we are working on, obviously, not maybe with the speed that may be required or desired by the university, but it is an area that we are working on in terms of our national transportation plan, which will encompass the issue of the transit authority, as well as taking into consideration, or rather the platform being on the 6 pillars that were identified. I think I've answered more than your question, I hope.
Chairman, if I may. Sorry.
Just also allow, I apologize. If I can also allow the Director of Highways to just make a statement in this area.
Yeah. How do we get the people to have the modal split, to park their cars and take the buses, right, the public transport bus? Right now, we're working with the PTSC because Dr. Townsend had spoke about the first and last mile. So we're working with IDB, right? And we are trying, by September, we want to have a pilot project, a park and ride pilot project along the two main corridors, the east-west and the north-south corridor. The benefit of a park and ride is that the people who like to drive, everybody like to drive. So they could leave their home, go maybe in south at the Atto Bolden Stadium, hypothetically, park their car, and they have the option to either carpool or a bus. The details of this park and ride initiative will be worked out within the next couple months. And by September, we hope to have a pilot of this park and ride initiative. Right? Why we like pilot project is because we are a small community, we are a small country with limited funding. So generally we conceptualize the project, we put the objectives of the project, we run it as a pilot, and after we review the benefits and advantages of it. In my view, if you could sit in a luxury bus and get to Port of Spain, the amount of people who suffer mentally should reduce, economically they will save, and their health will be increased. So the challenge in the pilot is to encourage people to try to participate in this kind of initiative.
Yeah, Dr. Townsend.
Yes, I'm agreeing with everybody. But I want to put a context in it. The issues you raise in terms of the private sector, well, yes, as the PS here would said, the private sector actually is the major, by far, provider of public transport services in this country. So that's already there. I agree that we should be considering, in fact, the 1996 document, National Internal Transport Policy, suggested that we look very strongly at whether or not the restrictions that we currently have in terms of vehicle size for public service vehicles and ownership for public service vehicles are required. And that is to say, if it's defined as a maxi taxi, it cannot be more than 25 seats, unless it is authorized as an omnibus by PTSC, which is what the regulation of the PS was talking about, which is a difficult way to do it, but it can be done in the short term to operate a public service vehicle that you are not a maxi taxi, you are a bus, but so authorized by PTSC. In fact, we tried to do that back in the 1990s to some level. But it is a clumsy way to use the regulation, actually. What we really need is to remove from PTSC, in my opinion, the burden of trying to administer the public transport system. They run into difficulties in terms of Citygate trying to administer in terms of maxi taxis. And they will continue to run into difficulties because of the conflict between their role as operator and attempting to be a role as a regulator as well, as you can imagine. So, yes, we could be looking at the whole question of size of vehicles and more private sector involvement, but all of that, even the park and ride, which I think is a great initiative, how are we going to operate and manage park and ride systems on a continuous basis? Is it the Highways Division going to manage park and ride? Is it PTSC going to manage park and ride? I would suggest to the park and ride people that if you're looking at park and ride using PTSC, you're using the wrong mode. Why not look at park and ride using maxi taxi, since the maxi taxi is a much bigger mode, a much more acceptable mode, a much cheaper mode in terms of the taxpayer dollar. But those are just questions that can be asked and the details can be worked out. But the details will only be worked out by an agency that has the whole transportation sector in its viewpoint. And that's the point we want to make in terms of that, in terms of public transport.
Thank you. Member Parry?
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Townsend, Dr. Townsend, sorry. I want to thank you for your clinical presentation. I think you have spoken what the general public has been aware of. I am wary that the 20, 40, 50, and 60 vision will have the same plans, right? Because I have been hearing most of what you've said from the 90s. Now, I live in Mayaro. I worked in Port of Spain for 17 years, and I drove from Mayaro to Port of Spain every single day for that. And if I have to get here today for an 8 o'clock meeting without the convenience of a priority bus route pass, I have to leave home at 4:30, Mayaro. If I leave home at 5 o'clock, I reach the Port of Spain 9 after 9. Now, I understand we are an island. We have a little under 2,000 square miles of space, so land use is critical. We have the proliferation of 2 and 3 cars in every home. Those cars are not going to go anywhere. Culture and behavior in your studies at the university over the years and in your experience in other jurisdictions, how important is our policy framework as governments going forward in dealing with cultural and behavioral issues in terms of encouraging people to do more walking, more riding, less driving, carpooling, all those other things that you spoke about that we should be addressing? What can be done in terms to deal with that cultural and behavioral issue from your perspective?
Well, culture is really a combination of habits that are done over a long time. And culture, those habits are a response to the external situation. What we have to do from a governance perspective, have the policies and plans which understand those responses and therefore look to determine a different response. One of the key things we do not have is a deep understanding of people's choice behavior. Yes, we speculate, but we have not created, or the science does allow for it. In fact, one of the things we're doing at the university now is a relatively small project looking at travel demand, trying to see how people do make that shift. And we're hoping to expand that on a larger scale. We should be doing a national household travel survey on at least every 3 to 5 years in this country, as most other countries do, so we keep a handle on what's happening. But how do you get cultural change? You get cultural change by changing the environment. I'm going to give you two examples of how we were able to do cultural change when I was in PTSC. There was a time, and I suspect the current management don't know about it, there was a time in PTSC when it was considered to be an animal express place. I use that word because that is what they called certain buses that were going to certain places. When we decided to bring the express commuter service into the PTSC, we did a couple of focus groups and we asked people about, we described the service, what it would be like, and we asked them who they think should run it. And almost everybody said, it's a great service, but don't let PTSC run it. Because their perspective of a PTSC service was one that people were pushing and shoving and animal express. And we argue that if we provide them with a certain quality of bus and a certain expectation of service and back it up by actually providing that service, not only will they decide to shift, but they will in fact behave themselves in a different manner. And at least from up to when I had left, it was clear that the passengers did do some shifting and did in fact behave themselves in a particular manner. So that whereas before we had situations with bus seats being cut up and vandalized and that kind of stuff, when we brought in the ECS, we didn't have any of those kind of circumstances. We had people who were prepared to line up and wait. So that's one. The second cultural change was the issue of the role of the maxi taxi in providing services. We argued that a properly administered maxi taxi system could be safe and efficient in moving school children in rural areas. And that is why we were able to introduce and manage, for decades it was managed. It's only recently we've had some hiccups with it, the school maxi taxi transport system, where a series of monitoring systems were put into place. Again, apparently a cultural shift. people will shift their behaviors if you understand what is the basis for the behavior. When I say the issue of the last mile and first mile is a key, even a PTSD feeder route, and the point is the PTSD structured to run a feeder route that requires a smaller vehicle like an Uber? Maybe what you need to do is to have an arrangement with the TNCs, which are the transport network companies, the Ubers and the Lyfts of this world, using, of course, legal vehicles and not PH vehicles, because there are taxis that would allow themselves to be used that way. And a user of a service who wants to go home late, instead of having to say, let me buy a car because I'm working late, I'm working shift. Let me buy a car for my daughter because she's working shift, and I want her to be home safe. Maybe I can go to that transit authority, and by their information, I know, and she would know, that when she comes out of the bus or she comes out of the maxi taxi, that she will be able to access an authorized smaller vehicle to get her where she wants to go. That is what people are looking at now. But we have to have the institution to plan and organize that.
Dr. Townsend, let me ask you this. You are diving into a lot of areas that I would probably like Mr. Bashir Mohammed to respond to after, in terms of PTSD and some of the areas that they may be looking at right now. Just as a side question, how often do the University of the West Indies, Ministry of Works, Ministry of Local Government, the administrative component, how often do you group meet to discuss these type of issues, specifically this one? Have you met lately outside of this forum within the recent past to formulate policy, to assist the government to formulate policy, national policy? Is that something that happens often?
Not often enough for our liking.
When would have been the last time that this group
We would have met the ministry in 2018. We had a meeting, a fairly significant meeting with the Minister of Works and Transport. And we were hoping that some other meetings would come out of that. I know that as I said, I know that they're doing some work on a national transportation plan. We are actually planning to host a symposium on the 16th of May on transportation sector issues. And in fact, I was telling the PS that she has an invitation coming in the mail to come and talk to us about the National Transportation Plan so we can get a chance to hear and exchange ideas.
Okay.
We also, through the Association of Professional Engineers, APET, send documents or recommendations to the ministry. In fact, right now we have, as I said before, the two documents that are in the docket here are in front of both the Ministry of Works and Transport and the Ministry of Planning and Development in terms of the way forward in mass transit and the way forward in terms of a conceptual plan for the use of the priority bus route as the start of a BRT system. So the short answer is not often enough in my opinion, but that's something that we are definitely open to in terms of continued interface with the ministry.
Mr. Mohammed, would you like to address a couple of the issues that Dr. Townsend raised in terms of PTSD and perhaps the bigger, larger role that they can play in, effecting some change culturally in terms of choice, in terms of transport modalities? Any comments on that?
Thank you, Member, and good morning again, Chairman and members of the committee and fellow participants. I must say, at present, PTSC is not able to deliver the level of service that we want to deliver to our traveling commuters. At present, we're only able to service 48% of our routes, and as well as we're only able to achieve 49% of on-time performance. The greater challenge is we don't have enough buses to support all our routes and be able to provide an on-time service. We're in the process with our line Ministry of Works to acquire the relevant number of buses. And in as soon, early as later this year or early into next year, we should be getting the first tranche of those buses. Our intent really is to stabilize our main trunk routes to be able to provide a more reliable and dedicated service to meet the needs of our traveling public. We've piloted a model PTSC in Tobago, and we've started that a number of months ago. And we are actually beginning to see the results of having a stable service. We've not advertised this to the traveling public in Tobago, but I've seen our commuters move from 20-odd thousand commuters on a monthly basis in Tobago to 43-odd thousand commuters using our service in Tobago. So once we're able to provide a reliable service, our commuters gradually get on board and start using our service. So our intent, and that is part of our strategic plan, is to be able to provide a reliable, on-time, on-schedule service to the traveling public, to be able to meet their demands and be able to do what we want to do, is alleviate the traffic congestion.
Last question. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. In looking at the sequence here, in terms of how the traffic flows, we have the Ministry of Works, who is responsible for the highways, the major routes, that taking traffic from communities like Mayaro into Sandy Grande, Arima, Port of Spain. And then you have the local government, who would be responsible for the landing of that traffic in terms of where is that traffic going to go when it reaches inside San Fernando, Port of Spain, and so on. Where does people park, how, in terms of one-ways and so on. There are a number of issues that you see all the time, and as a member of parliament, you have the business people will come to me every day complaining about the police. It's harassing their customers because of parking. And then you have the issue of people saying, well, why the business people didn't provide park in the first place. And then the police saying, well, they're just doing their jobs. When you have to find a fix for those things, is there a conversation that is happening between the various agencies that could address those questions? Because we sit here and we hear all the theories and the policies and so on. But I want to know what it is that you are going to tell Planning Division that for any new, or to enforce that when a commercial building goes up, that if you have to put 20 parking, 30 parking, you find the land for it, or you're not going to get your permission. If the town centers, they are asking us in Rio Claro for more parking space, and the space is limited. Why are we not speaking at a local government level to do rings around these communities so traffic that has to go to Princestown bypasses Rio Claro rather than coming into it? Are these conversations happening in any real way in terms of our future planning, our future rollout? We bring, all these IDBs and all these external experts to tell us these things. And is any of your policies, is it being reflected in it going forward?
Well, at the regional level, we basically formulate plans based on the national context and the national policies and plans, because we have to deal with to traffic and through traffic. So you have persons who may be working and living in those areas, but you also have the traffic that are generated because of people who are passing through those town centers. In the development of our municipal development plans, there was a situational analysis that was undertaken, and those plans were formulated within a collaboration of all relevant stakeholders. And we raised, what I should say, with Ministry of Planning and Development with respect to their land use policies. And as you know, with the construction permitting process, if Town and Country gives permission based on the nature of the development, they are also required to get a certificate of environmental clearance that may require local traffic studies. Also, through our regional coordinating committee meetings, which I held regularly, we do have the TTPS represented and the Ministry of Planning and other relevant stakeholders. So with respect to the local level, we can only do short-term measures in the absence of those long-term measures being implemented nationally that we could, what I should say, implement at the local level, because we can fix some things at the local level, but there are some things that are larger than us. And it also depends on the policies related to demand management. Why do people travel? And where are they going? And is it that we allow people to continue to travel to Port of Spain to work? And these are decisions that have to be made at the national level in terms of an integrated transport management policy and plan. And everything else that we do would only be ad hoc and piecemeal, and it can only be, you're talking about transportation, but do we have lay-bys and transportation hubs with proper facilities that people could be protected from the criminal elements and the natural elements? Do we have pavements that are pedestrianized that people can feel comfortable without falling into a drain? So it's really something that there is no quick fix, but we can start incrementally with the little measures that we can implement to control traffic from an enforcement aspect with respect to the regulatory bodies related to construction permitting, and of course traffic management at the local level, which is in the hands of our TTPS, Municipal Police Service.
Yeah, Mr. Mark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. I'm sorry that I missed the contribution of the team from UWI, led by Dr. Townsend and the rest. But you did indicate, Dr. Townsend, and I want to direct this question arising from what you had said to the Ministry of Works and Transport about a national transportation plan. Madam Permanent Secretary, good morning. Can you tell this committee whether there is or the ministry is addressing at this time a national transportation plan?
Good morning, member. Yes, the ministry is addressing a national transportation plan.
Can you tell us, for instance, what is the time frame for it? From what period? Is it a 20-year national transportation plan, a 30-year, a 10-year? Could you tell us?
Okay. We are at the point where we have developed the draft terms of reference for the plan. We are getting some assistance from the IDB in finalizing that document. It is a 20-year national plan in most instances. What I would like to do is just to let the Chief Technical Officer, who is in charge of it, give you a little more detail on the areas covered so that you have a broad perspective of what is going to be addressed.
Thank you.
Good morning. Mahadev Jagdev, Ministry of Works. As PS said, we are developing the terms of reference for the National Transportation Plan. We have sought the assistance of the IDB in refining those terms of reference to ensure it's up to the required standard. That plan would cover a 20-year planning horizon. It will cover the three major areas: land, sea, and air sectors. It will also address a transportation, an overarching transportation policy to govern all sectors. In addition to that, as earlier mentioned, we are hoping to treat with a transit authority which will manage, govern the transportation sector. Those are some of the key objectives of the plan. In terms of timeline, we are hopeful to commence this service within the first quarter of the new fiscal year, that is October to December 2019. The duration of the study is approximately 18 months, all things being equal.
Do we have an existing national transportation policy or plan? Or let's say plan, national plan?
In in 1967, the National Transportation Plan was done. Subsequent to that, a number of initiatives were taken to update the plan, because the 67 plan was supposed to be 20 years, a validity period of 20 years. The last initiative was in 2005, when the ministry undertook the Comprehensive National Transportation Plan. There were some challenges with that plan, and the government, in its 2015 policy document, mandated the ministry to undertake this initiative, which we are currently undertaking.
So are we saying that from the period, it's a 20-year plan, came into being in 1967,
yes,
expired in 1987, between 1987 to 2015, that we're talking about close to about 28 years?
Correct.
Are we being advised as a committee that Trinidad and Tobago was not run by a proper national transportation plan for 28 years, and things were being done on a basically ad hoc basis?
No, it's not entirely so. The 1967 plan is a valid plan, and most of the major transportation trunk road highways that would subsequently develop came out of that plan. So we were not totally operating in a vacuum. What is true, though, is we did not update the plan as required, and which is the deficiency we are now trying to correct.
So the plan is a dead plan?
Well, it's an outdated plan.
Outdated plan?
Correct, sir.
And therefore, in essence, the dynamics of the economy of TNT and all the changes that were taking place globally, Trinidad and Tobago would have been left behind for almost about 2 decades because of our failure as a country to update, upgrade, transform, renew, revive that national transportation plan. Is that a fact?
Correct, sir.
We were like Rip Van Winkle, sleeping whilst the world was progressing in the national transportation area. I want to ask whether the Ministry of Transport would be taking into account the following elements. The element of decentralization, which is very critical. Everything is Port of Spain. That is why you have a lot of madness in terms of transportation congestion. The whole of South come into North. The whole of Central come into North. Trinidad. We're back in the colonial days. What I'm asking is that in devising a new transportation plan for Trinidad and Tobago, would the ministry, as part of its terms of reference, be looking at this whole concept of decentralization? I know that is not your responsibility, but in terms of it being tangential to a proper transportation plan, would you be considering that as part of your terms of reference? Decentralization.
Chair, through you, member, I appreciate sometimes when the question is asked and answered. That is not part of our remit. However, in all our proposals in terms of transportation plans, and I say that in respect of this is a national transportation plan, but we have been undertaking land transportation studies over the years, which may not have been land, air, and sea, but we have been doing land. The issue of decentralization would always play a role in terms of the plan being able to address the present land use function that exists, as well as future in terms of the information that we are provided with from the Ministry of Planning and Development.
From a health point of view, we know fossil fuels, which we are inundated with, contribute a lot to greenhouse gases and worsens climate conditions. So we are contributing in a small way to the climate madness that we are experiencing globally. I wanted to ask whether in your new transportation plan, whether this whole question of, again, I'm asking and I'm answering consistent with what you have just said, but I just want to know if it is tangential to what you may be embarking upon. Would you be looking at this whole issue of this transition from fossil fuels to greenery, to renewables, because cars, as you know, Madam Permanent Secretary, most of the cars in Trinidad and Tobago use fossil fuels, different premium, diesel, regular, and that contributes to a lot of health challenges. Would that also be tangential to your plan in terms of study?
It is one of the pillars underlying the areas to be addressed in the plan, in keeping with the areas identified by Dr. Townsend in terms of the reduction of air pollution.
I'm happy to hear that. Now, I'm also interested in what is taking place at the level of these heavy vehicles. In modernized societies, and I've been like you to many countries, heavy vehicles that compete with my vehicle for space on the nation roads, especially at crucial hours, endangering my life, traveling at tremendous speed. I would like to ask the Ministry of Works and Transport, what is the policy, and is there any effort to revisit these vehicles' use of our nation's roads between the hours of 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, moving them out completely during those hours and letting them come in the midnight hour from 10 in the night to 5 in the morning, and then they disappear and reappear again next day along those same lines. What are we doing? Because that contributes a lot to traffic congestion in Trinidad and Tobago. So I would like to know what steps are being taken, what policy is being actively pursued to get those heavy vehicles off the road during rush hours.
Member, as you would know, the importation of heavy vehicles comes under the remit of the Trinidad Transport Board, and in licensing these vehicles, invariably those vehicles are given a route, and there are times when they're given a time. So in a small way, there is some measures already being undertaken through the work of the Trinidad Transport Board, and we can provide you with any documentation that you may require in that aspect. However, we are aware that not necessarily the fact that you are given that requirement means that that is what occurs. So there's an enforcement aspect to it. In the ministry, approximately, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we held a meeting with most of the large contractors to address the issue of the utilization of heavy vehicles on the nation roadways. Now, while it was not directly in relation to the issue of traffic congestion, but rather the actual utilization of the roadway and the size and the weight of the vehicles and the effect on the roadway. We are hoping that this start will continue in dialogue to develop certain areas that we can work upon. The issue though of the restriction of the vehicles in terms of the time is not solely an issue with the Ministry of Works and Transport, but it transcends other areas inclusive of trade. So that is a dialogue that we will have to undertake. But it is an area that will be addressed in the document that we are now seeking to put forward, the plan, the National Transportation Plan.
Can you tell me if any study has been done on this matter?
Now I'm being told 2012, but I'll let the our traffic engineer give you a little further documentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. In 2012, a study was conducted with the use of freight vehicles on the nation roadways. A consultation process was done after the study, informing all users of the freight vehicles and also the businessmen of Trinidad and Tobago came to that consultation. And a number of issues were raised from the businessman perspective with respect to the usual conversations of crime and the length of hours they will have to, the time where they will have to do their receiving of goods and services. And obviously crime was the forefront. And from then, consultations went down a little bit, but the conversation never left the ministry thereafter. But a study was done, and as the PS just reiterated, it is also going to be a part of the National Transportation Plan going forward.
I have two final questions, Mr. Chair. Can we get a copy of that report or study? And the last question I'd like to ask here, before I come back, because I have a series of questions. You might have to bring back all here, Mr. Chair. Could you tell us, in terms of the social and economic costs of traffic congestion, can you tell us, Madam Permanent Secretary, what is being done to address this crisis? Because I'm sure that you would have done some studies on this. Loss of productivity, man hours, people being killed on the road, murdered, they're frustrated, road rage as they call it. So there's a lot of economic and social and psychological and emotional costs to traffic congestion in TNT. So could you tell this committee what has been done? Has a study been conducted, one, and what measures have been taken by the ministry to address this phenomenon?
Member, this, of course, will be part of the upcoming study, and we would have aspects of this in other studies that would have been done prior. However, to answer the fundamental question that you're asking in terms of what has been done, I want to suggest that our full work program is geared towards this in terms of traffic management. If we start off at the basis, which is what Dr. Townsend has been advocating for a while, in terms of the institutional arrangement to manage traffic. So in terms of that, we've spoken about the actual branch within the ministry. We do have a review being undertaken of the ministry's organizational structure, one aspect of which is to deal with the issue of where we place traffic management. In terms of the external institutional arrangement, the establishment of the Transit Authority is part of what we are focusing on to bring that about. We have been working with PTSC, not just in terms of the number of buses that they are to bring on board, but also in terms of the question of the servicing of the buses, in terms of putting in new intelligent transportation system, so people are aware of where the buses will be, when they will be reached there, and how they can utilize them. We have been working with the maxi taxis. We have brought back on stream the Maxi Taxi Advisory Board to bring out the issues that may be affecting maxi taxis. On that board, we also have representatives from the Taxi Association to also try and deal with that situation. In terms of the physical infrastructure, we have not just the large projects that you see on in terms of the highways that we are undertaking, but we are also working on the smaller, what may be seen as the smaller projects in terms of the best utilization of the roadways. There are some areas where we are looking in terms of peak periods, turning it from 2 into 3 directional, moving the direction, all with an aim of addressing the traffic congestion at peak periods. We're also looking at the question of developing laybys, because so there are a number of areas that we are working on directly aimed at addressing the issue of traffic within Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Before you do, before we go to you, Mr. Smith, I'd just like to include the public in this hearing, and we just have a question from the public through the Facebook page for Dr. Townsend. The person is asking, what role do you see ride sharing playing? What role in TNT? That's the question through the Facebook page. So we'll get your answer, and then we go to Mr. Jennings Smith.
All right, it's interesting that ride sharing is a reach. I tell people we have had ride sharing since the start of our taxi system. They're now discovering it. But the TNCs, or transport network companies, have brought a different spin on the whole issue of organizing with an information-based system services. And in fact, there is a role for such services, especially in the context of providing people with that door-to-door convenience and that ease of movement and that quick response that they're looking for. So that, as I was mentioning, that mobility as a service, or MAAS, is now being considered in the context of, as you mentioned, the Transit Authority. The Transit Authority is a sort of mobility as a service manager. So therefore, we could envisage, and just an idea, but in fact it can be investigated, that a transit authority, in conjunction with a PTSC, with a maxi taxi system, and with a ride-sharing companies, can therefore have a whole design of the transportation system that would allow a potential passenger a seamless arrangement in terms of utilization, in terms of intermodality and transferring, so that they can get a closer door-to-door experience. You see, that's the level that we have to get to if we really want to transition people from out of that second car to remain one-car families, etc. So ride-sharing, but I would advocate ride-sharing with properly authorized vehicles. I do not agree that we need to do ride-sharing with PH vehicles. There's absolutely no reason why we cannot, in fact, have authorized taxis. What does authorized taxi mean? That the driver is certified and licensed properly. That means he has gone through the police certificate of good character, etc. Two, that the vehicle is properly certified to operate as a public service vehicle. Right? So we can do that in that way. And be that as part, especially for the low volume routes and especially for the low volume times. That may be the best solution. So the answer is yes, but it has to be organized.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just to piggyback on the comments of Dr. Townsend in relation to the PH taxi problem. And as much as you've identified, I think it was in your opening statement, that the number of taxis in Trinidad and Tobago has moved from 25,000 to 13,000. So it seems that there's a trend that's decreasing. And I can't see if there's a correlation between the number of PH taxis. Does anybody have any information on how many PH taxis estimated are they operating in Trinidad and Tobago? Nobody has any information on that. So what is being done to address that issue, or what can be done? What is the problem? So we know that individuals are taking their private vehicles and they're running taxis with it. What can be done about that?
Member, we do not have an exact figure. However, through the Maxi Taxi Advisory Committee that the PS spoke about earlier, we addressing the main issue Dr. Townsend spoke about earlier with the first mile and the last mile. What we've realized is that the unofficial T vehicles, the white vans, and PH, I mean, yes, we know they're operating on main routes, but many of them are operating on this first mile and last mile scenario. And we, on the committee, were trying to address that. So what we did, we collected data of where we have these unofficial stands of PH and T vans and the quantities of them and number of persons that they are carrying to address that first mile and last mile scenario. And what we did, we came up with a factor of the quantities that we may need to address with official vehicles for those areas. So we don't have an exact number, but we try to use the figures of how they are operating right now and come up with a context on the number of official vehicles we should put in those areas. We are coming up with a framework to see how we could address that.
Okay, so you've identified that there's a demand for these vehicles. So they are fulfilling a need, obviously. Is there not a way to have some kind of initiative to convert them into taxis? Because they're not converting, they're not following the regulations, they're not, doing the right thing by way of transferring their vehicles into taxis. So we have to find a way, because there are dangers when you have these PH taxis servicing a need. So the problem that you're facing is there is a need, people are using them, so there is something that needs to be fulfilled. You just need them to take that extra step and become actual taxis. So what initiatives are being put in place to sort of convert these PH vehicles that are obviously needed, this is what we're discovering today, and bring them into that system of where you have these regulated H taxis? Have you spoken to the taxi associations? Have they tried to, because it seems like you know where they are. You know where they are and you know where they're operating, so identifying them is not the problem. It's just converting them into taxis that is. And I assume that they're choosing to remain as PH taxis because it's cheaper to do so. They don't have to pay anything or identify themselves in any kind of way doing that. So therefore they decide to remain, and there's no enforcement either. So they just remain as PH taxis. But there must be something that we can do to try and get them converted. Is there anything that the ministry or anybody else is trying to do to sort of invite them over or entice them over to registering as taxis?
Member, in terms of inviting them over, I want to suggest that we have invited them over on a number of different occasions. We've had many discussions on this matter, and we have indicated not just the driver or the PH driver, but the user, the risk of utilizing a PH vehicle. One may want to suggest that maybe it's an issue of enforcement which will allow them to be further invited over to the mainstream aspect of it. There is also a view that, yes, they are needed, but it may be that their existence does not allow for other legal means of transportation to evolve as well, because there are times when the existence of a PH stand may not allow for another stand to flourish.
I like what you said with enforcement. So let me ask this question. What is the repercussions for running a PH taxi? You're telling me that there are stands. If it's illegal, and I'm not saying it's, I don't know, if it's illegal, then you're literally running a stand. This is bold-facedness. What is it? What is it? Is there a fine?
For the corporation to respond.
Yes.
Good afternoon to all. The use of any private vehicle is contrary to registration. That's first and foremost. And then you have the issue of insurance to cover those persons in those vehicles. So definitely, you are using a private vehicle for transportation of persons on the nation roadway. It is an offense, and it is punishable by the law.
Okay, so let's walk this through. So we've heard today that there's PH stands. We've heard today that there's a need for PH vehicles, right? And it's obvious that this is pervasive in certain areas. So from the standpoint of enforcement, because it's encroaching upon those who are doing the right thing and are registering, what can we do to ramp up enforcement? Because it seems as though it's an enforcement problem. These vehicles are identifiable. I don't think it's a problem. I mean, if you want to do some undercover work and have officers take the PH taxi, and once they go on that route, you let them know and you charge them. I mean, you charge one or two and the rest will fall into place really quickly. What, and this is directed to the officers here today, what can be done by way of enforcement to treat with that issue of PH taxis?
Again, enforcement is possible, but at the end of the day, if we as police officers, we on the nation roads, we enforce, the whole nation will come down on us, because there's definitely need for a certain amount of transportation which is not available, right? If we go out on the road and we say, look, well, you know what I mean, we're going to charge these people and them, bring them forward, we have an issue again. We take them to the magistracy, there's another issue there, right? Because, and as it was earlier said, a man has to eat a food, right? So the police now becomes a target whereby we are putting pressure, undue pressure on the small man, right? So from time to time, we as police officers on the road, we would charge them, right? But sometimes it goes before the court and the matter just dismissed.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to introduce the officials, Mrs. Glenda Jennings-Smith, member of the committee, and she has a question she would like to ask.
Thank you, Chairman. We have heard a number of issues brought to this committee this morning, and quite clearly, I want to personally compliment the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Works. From listening to her, I'm sorry I didn't come just after she spoke, because from listening to her, how she responded to all the questions and also the officials, because I've sat here on committees before and noted the type of answers we have gotten as a committee. I want to compliment your team, because it shows us some hope and it gives us a vision of what you are planning relative to a national transportation plan for Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to start by complimenting you on how you all have been responding to our questions. It shows that you all have been meeting with stakeholders, you all have been talking. But I want to bring a sour issue now, because quite recently, over the past 3 weeks, something happened in the town of Sangre Grande. And I want to quote the PS from the rural department, when you said, and you admitted by your very words, that you all find yourself making ad hoc and piecemeal decisions. And I really want to know, was the decision made in Sangre Grande an ad hoc and piecemeal decision? And if not, can you explain to me what drove you all to make that decision? Because from my understanding, at the end of the day, those roads come under the direct authority of the rural department, which is the regional corporation.
I would have to provide that in writing. I'm really sorry. I don't have the details of that matter at hand. Yeah, sure.
When making a decision to change or to deal with, and I will quote from your presentation, Your submission identified lack of a comprehensive transportation plan and policy as a major contributor to traffic congestion in Trinidad and Tobago. That came from your ministry. So I want to ask you, what transportation plans and policy currently guide your ministry and the corporation?
I have worked with some of our extracts from our municipal development plans, and each of our municipal development plans do have local transportation plans that guide some of the activities on the ground. These plans, as I explained, though, relates to the municipality, but the National Transportation Plan will take into consideration the issues around the municipality. As I explained, we deal not only with the local traffic, but the through traffic, which is the national traffic that may be passing through our town centers. And as such, it will take an integrated, comprehensive national transportation plan to be able to deal with all the issues related to traffic management.
Are you saying that your ministry is inadequately sourced or funded or resourced to make decisions relative to traffic arrangement in and around centers like corporations? Let us say, I'm not only speaking about Sangre Grande now, because, I mean, in Sangre Grande, we had a disaster happening a few weeks ago, and people will never forget that. But I really want to show today who are the individuals responsible for making those decisions, because we have places like Princestown, we have places like Shogunas, where we have continuous traffic situation taking place. But then you have the regional corporation making the decisions to guide the day-to-day activities as far as traffic is concerned for those areas. So I want to make a question also to the Ministry of Works, because what's really happening between the collaboration between the Ministry of Works and Rural Development in determining and finalizing plans which affects the citizenry of this country?
Good morning, member. My response to your question is that the municipal corporations are not solely responsible to address those issues, but we engage in collaboration with the Traffic Management Division of the Ministry of Works and Transport, as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So as far as the responsibility of the corporation is concerned to deal with traffic issues, it's really collaborative in nature.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm getting answers which seem to suggest that you had a cooperative or a collaborative approach to dealing with that particular issue in Sangre Grande. So, Mr. C. Paul, Deputy PS, you seem to know more about it. Can you tell me what actually happened 3 weeks ago?
As indicated by my senior, the ministry, we will have to get back to you on this. I am not specifically aware of this crisis that you are referring to, and unfortunately unable to give a proper response.
Madam PS, there was a traffic congestion in the town of Sangre Grande, which was carried live on the newspapers, live on press, and live on social media. As the Deputy PS and the PS in Rural Division, Ministry of Rural
Development and Local Government.
Right. Are you saying that things happen under your control and you don't have information as to who did it, why it happened, and how it happened?
Member, through the chair, I just want you to know that the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, we have 2 permanent secretaries with different portfolios. So I am aware that there was a traffic issue in Sangre Grande because it was all over the media, but the details of that matter may have been referred to the other permanent secretary, P.S. Daniel. So that's why I took the undertaking to provide the information that you require in writing, because I do not want to give information that I am not aware of.
Mr. Chair, I will end as I started. When people come to these hearings, it is always, pleasing when proper answers are provided to us. And these hearings are aired live. And I could say I have 30,000 or 40,000 people looking on this morning. And as their representative, I must ask that question. And when we have responses such as these, I have to remember the PS of Ministry of Works and really compliment, because every question asked this morning, even Mr. Townsend from that side, you all were prepared. And this is the level of preparation that is expected when you come to these hearings. We need answers, because you all are accountable. You all are the technocrats. You all are the persons who make a difference to this country. And people like to hear answers and reasonable responses when we ask questions. Thank you.
Okay. We are out of time. What I understand from members is there are still a lot of questions that they would like to ask. You all would have noticed I haven't asked a single question as yet. And so after this committee deliberate, there's a high chance that we will be requesting you all again to spend some time with us to look at your responses in more detail in terms of a wider scope. But before I ask for brief closing comments from Dr. Townsend, Mrs. Ramlogan, and Mrs. Francis Yearwood, just brief closing remarks. Mr. Jagdev, when Mr. Mark was asking you about the National Transportation Plan, he did query, he did mention a time frame, but I think in your response, it probably slipped. Could you, before we go to the brief closing remarks, advise us of what sort of time frame that the ministry has for this National Transportation Plan in terms of, completion of terms of reference, invitation of proposals, and all of those things?
The ministry schedule reflects that the project should commence by the first quarter of the new fiscal, that is October to December of this year. Thereafter, the project is scheduled to be undertaken in 18 months. So 18 months thereafter, it should be completed. That's the time frame we're looking at. Between now and September, we intend to complete our terms of reference, go out for local and international tender, evaluate the tenders, and make a recommendation for award of tenders. That's the time frame we're looking at, sir.
All right, and Dr. Townsend did mention, in terms of his long-term, some of the long-term measures, refer to the UN Commission for Sustainable Development and the identification of elements for sustainable transportation and sustainable transport development based on 6 pillars. Madam PS, I think you did, if I remember correctly, mention that is going to form the basis for the terms of reference or be a significant part of?
Yes, Chair, I did identify that those areas were looked at in the development of the terms of reference.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Townsend, closing remarks?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Brief.
Just 3 quick things. I think some of the questions pointed out here confirm the concerns we have raised in terms of the need for properly organized institutions for transportation planning as well as for transit management. And I would want to advocate very strongly for that in terms of how we go forward. I don't think we need to wait for the 18-month National Transportation Plan to start to move that forward. Someone mentioned that, in fact, it was then, I think the member mentioned that it was then Vision 2020. I would say it was there in 1988 when I became Chief Traffic Engineer. And we don't have to wait to move it forward. We also do not have to wait to move forward, in our opinion, the start of the development of a mass transit system, and we want to strongly advocate for that. And just to say that we at the University of the West Indies and at the Association of Professional Engineers stand ready, willing, and able to assist the ministries in their own quest to move forward in this whole transportation planning. I'm not sure if it's a policy document or planning document that is being prepared. We do have a symposium. I've invited the PS and a team to come to. We'll probably get some clarification then. That's on May the 16th. I'm going to plug. But basically, we are willing to assist and willing to give our advice and give our expertise in that area. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend. Mrs. Ramlogan.
Thank you, Chair. The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government would like to thank you all for this opportunity to participate in this enlightening session, and we do look forward to continued collaboration with all relevant stakeholders moving forward. Thank you.
Mrs. Yearwood.
Chair members, we want to thank you again for inviting us. I think we have made the statement on previous visits to this committee that we consider it our committee, seeing that it is on physical infrastructure. So we see you as almost as part of the Ministry of Works and Transport in a high-level capacity. We recognize a number of the areas that the university has identified because it has actually been part of what we have been utilizing in terms of our own planning process. We also take note of Dr. Townsend's statement in terms of the timeline for the National Transportation Plan, and we let you know that while we see the plan as a vital cog in the overall process, we are undertaking measures even before the finalization of the plan to the extent that we can. But we do recognize what Dr. Townsend also indicated, that in all that we do, we must be driven by data. So we are trying to ensure that we are driven by data, and we have a number of projects earmarked, my apologies, in that direction, so that the steps that we take are properly guided. We hear that we may be coming again on this matter, and even though it is not always said, we almost look forward to coming, because it does allow us to continue to review the work of the ministry. So once again, Chair and members, we want to thank you for what you are doing on behalf of the population of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, so I'd like to really thank all officials who responded to our request. Thanks a lot for the preparation and your inputs, your willing participation. I'd like to thank all members, and I'd like to thank the Secretariat to this committee, the staff of Parliament, for their continued dedication and hard work. This meeting is adjourned.